Live. Hi, everyone. My name is Sonia, and I'm from WorkSafe Tasmania. I will be your moderator today. This session is Understanding the Challenges of People and Plant Interactions in the Civil Construction Context, presented by Mark Harris from Shaw Contracting. In recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, we acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the original and continuing custodians of the land, sea, and sky. We acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal people, all of whom have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture, and Aboriginal rights. Now, please take a moment to read the following slide about information you'll receive today. Use the chat tab towards your right-hand side to type any questions you have for today's presenter and the webinar. Those questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. Only presenter webcams will be used at the moment. And today's presentation is also being recorded and will be available on WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube channel towards the end of the month. Now, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce your presenter, Mark Harris. Mark is a seasoned risk and governance specialist working across the resources, manufacturing, and construction industries with both the trade and academic background. Mark has experience working across a range of multinational and domestic organizations and is currently working for Shaw Contracting in the Manager, People and Systems role. Mark is also a director in the not-for-profit sector. Welcome to the webinar, Mark, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Look, first of all, thanks for everyone joining. Very much appreciated. A little bit on Shaw to start with. Shaw is, and many may have already heard about Shaw and what we do, but we're a leading civil construction company that is based in the north. We also work across sort of water solutions, railway infrastructure, power electrical, energy and mining sectors. So we're pretty broad in our scope. We have approximately 130 skilled people within our organisation that are employed directly with Shaw. We use a range of contractors as well to support our sort of execution of projects across the state, which is really good. And we have a really close relationship with communities and the people who are impacted by the infrastructure that we do. So it's a really great organisation to work for. And as you can imagine, our risk profile is quite broad, something we'll sort of get involved in a little bit more throughout the presentation today. Like I said before, we're based in Launceston, but we do a lot of our work across the state. We've got a pretty large footprint in the west, east, and through the middle of the state as well, with some work up in the northwest. And we're always looking for opportunities to improve. So what are the key things we'll talk about today through the sort of plant interaction? And I've sort of got a definition on the following page around what that looks like. But for us, there's quite a bit of nuance in what it is that we do around people and plant interactions. So what does that look like? So I thought about the definition ahead of the presentation, and sort of one thing I wanted to discuss was the interaction between sort of vehicles, machinery, people within the work scope. So not just heavy plant, but vehicles as well. And sort of unpack that a little bit more around some of the experiences that we've had at Shaw Contract most recently. One thing we will sort of jump into, and I think it's around midway in the slide, is an enforceable undertaking that we entered into a couple of years ago around a people-plant interaction that happened on one of our work sites. And we'll sort of start to understand a little bit more around what we've done in that space and what has contributed to that event occurring in the first instance. We know, especially in our industry and within our organisation, they are a leading cause of workplace injuries and can lead to fatalities, especially in that construction. Tasmania is an agricultural, forestry-based state economy as well. So there's probably some on the call today where a lot of what we experience within the civil construction industry experience probably goes across into your organisations as well and into your industry. So there's some shared learnings there that we can go through. One really important thing for us as an organisation is making sure that we're communicating with our workforce around what improvements look like and what those incident trends look like in our organisation. So for us, making sure that we're executing on our safety responsibilities, but our legal obligations as an organisation to those people, making sure that we're supplying them with equipment that is fit for purpose for the risks they face and the tasks they need to do. And then rolling all that into a sound risk management process on how we handle those kinds of risks within our workplace is also very important. And we'll sort of unpack some of those things that we've done across our organisation to try and reduce the risk of serious injuries and fatalities within the workplace. The next couple of slides are sort of data-driven, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about some of the key things that we're working on as an organisation around managing people-plant risks. So for us, data is king. And data is an interesting piece. Sometimes you can have too much data, sometimes you can have not enough data. So we're being quite critical around the type of data that we're collecting and then how we're applying that data within our organisation to drive improved outcomes for our people. So something we talk about is data-driven decisions, making sure that we've got some science behind the data and the incidents that we're seeing. But not only the incidents, so the lead indicators that we employ across our organisation to make sure that we're focusing in the right areas and the improvements that we're putting in place are going to drive an improvement in safety outcomes and not just safety outcomes. So safety outcomes is one thing, but that also leads on to operational performance gains as well. So it's having that holistic approach to how we look at data and then how we apply that in the organisational setting. Which is always an interesting piece. So we continue to focus on that extensively within our organisation, how we report, and then what we report on. So vehicle relate, just some data. I'm cognizant not to read from the slides too much, but vehicle incidents continue to account for the largest proportion of workplace fatalities. Now, across all industries, vehicle incidents continue to rank very highly in the space of fatalities, and we'll talk about serious injuries as well throughout our presentation today. Falls from height is a close second, but again, that vehicle, which is why it was important to always important to look at the definition to which you're looking to a challenge, being careful not just to focus on, say, plant-people interaction, but the broader scope of what that looks like. As we were saying before, civil construction or construction in general is a high-risk work environment. It sees a significant amount of fatalities and serious injuries across the country and continues to feature within Tasmania. And the data sets that we're seeing out of the recent 2024 report around workplace health and safety standards, it featured significantly. And as we know, Tasmania, agriculture, forestry, transport, construction, primary industries where we see these types of things, but also in the healthcare sector as well. We often think as the healthcare sector as musculoskeletal injuries within the hospital setting, but more frequently we're starting to see interactions and more conversation around vehicle-related incidents within those kinds of sectors. So it's quite prominent for all industry areas. At-risk occupations, we've got some slides a little bit further on, but labourers feature, machine operators feature, and trade workers feature as well, which is we think of that as being quite common given the nature of the work that we do. Civil construction is very manual in nature. It's not as manual as it used to be. We sort of see that through our resource modelling, that the increase in technology is leading to a reduction in people needing to be on the ground in high-risk areas or zones of the work environment. But they do still exist and we still have to put people, or people are still positioned in an at-risk area of that working operation. And then some common injuries we see: body stressing, musculoskeletal injuries, impact injuries. So especially when we're talking about people-plant interactions, when there is an interaction between those two items, so the plant and the individual, the human, then the outcome is quite severe in a lot of cases. And certainly in our case at Shaw, in our recent event that resulted in the enforceable undertaking, we saw significant injuries as a result. We can unpack that a little bit more later on. So what does it mean for us? Look, there's some slides here, but as we were talking about before, machinery operators and drivers, labourers, technicians, trade workers account for a large proportion of fatalities that we see within the sectors we've mentioned before. Agriculture, forestry, fishing, transport, postal, warehousing, and construction are all relatively high when it comes to fatality rates per 100,000 workers. So we as an industry need to be really attuned to what it is that we're doing, what it is that we're seeing, and where we can identify those opportunities for improvement. Something I'll talk about a little bit later on is looking for weak signals within an organisation where something may not be as we thought it might be. And we'll sort of talk about a little bit workers imagined, workers planned, and workers done, and how that changes over time, which can quite often result in seeing fatality rates such as these and serious injury rates. You'll see in the table just at the bottom of the page there, we've done a pretty good job at reducing, but we're sort of getting to this point over the last 5, 6, 7 years where we're seeing that plateau effect. And we might have a dip, and we might have a dip for a year, and then it comes back up, sort of settles, dips, comes back up again. So we're sort of riding this wave where we've gotten to a particular point, that sort of 180 fatalities a year within Australian workplaces, and we're just sort of not moving too much around that space. So hopefully the things we talk about today around what we're doing around people and plant interactions will help us drive those numbers down. And the same can be said for serious injury rates as well. We're getting quite good at treating serious injuries when they occur. So we're getting quick response, we're getting people treated and seen to, which is reducing the likelihood to an extent that we'll see a fatality, but we're still seeing serious injuries. So it's really important to understand that we're getting better at treating them as well. We're not necessarily stemming the flow of the type of events that lead to fatalities and very serious injuries. So we've still got some work to do in that space. As one can imagine, and as we discussed before, civil construction is a high-risk sector, and a little bit like worker fatalities by sex. And this data is, I've drawn it from 2023. I know there's a 2024 data set, but I've taken the 2023. Males account for the largest proportion of worker fatalities. By percentage, they're 95%, and fatality rate is far greater than that for the female cohort of that data set. I think, again, on reflection, it's sort of within the data, we know that's generally related to males predominantly working in high-risk industries. So that's why we see that lopsidedness. What is interesting, and I'm not sure I've got it in the slides, is the demographics for serious injury and fatalities. Quite often the focus is on young workers, but what we start to see, or certainly what I see through some of the data sets that I look at, is the more experienced demographics within the workplace who have been in workplaces for long periods of time. We're actually starting to see some higher rates of serious injury and illness and fatalities within those cohorts. So it's quite an interesting dynamic, that sort of societal norm that young people are risk takers. And the data doesn't always correlate to that kind of societal norm and thinking. So us as a workplace, given that we've got a very diverse sort of age demographic for our workforce, we need to make sure that the controls that we're putting in place are considering the risk perception and decision making of all groups of people that exist within our organisation. So it's really important for us to look at that. Labourers, we were sort of mentioning before, make up a large proportion. At the start of the presentation, I was talking a little bit about the number of labourers that we're having within our workforces at the moment. We are seeing a reduction in that over time, but there's still a significant proportion of those that get injured. So for us, it's really important to continue to focus in those spaces. But they are quite still alarming statistics when we look at that, which is quite challenging. What does that mean for us from a workers' compensation perspective? A lot. Again, it's a bit like the fatality frequency rates that we're looking at before. We sort of got these plateaus that occur. You can see there's not a lot of change from 2008, 2009 through to 2022. And we're sort of looking at, what's that, close to 15 years in between those areas. So that's, again, that's remaining quite static. So some of our controls are probably aging in their application, and they're really important and baseline controls. What we're feeling is that we're sort of probably not getting the impact that we want from those types of traditional controls, and they're heavily reliant upon being applied because they're generally administrative or something to that extent. So there's a fair bit of work for us to do in that space yet. We mentioned it before, but again, there's just interesting data that people can find. This is just pulled off WorkSafe Australia. It's pretty easy to find. We've sort of gone by state location when I look at these types of injury profiles and claims, and the breakdown of agency. So if you look on the right hand side there, when I think of a civil construction organisation, we use a lot of non-powered hand tools, appliances and equipment, mobile plant or yellow goods, as we commonly call them, and transport vehicles. Feature highly machinery and fixed plant, powered plant and appliances, tooling, all feature really highly within the breakdown of agency. So for us, the data's really, really clear. When we look internally to our organisation, we track plant damage, and we track it on a frequency rate, much like the same we track total recordable injury rates. We use the same metric. Instead of measuring it by 1 million hours worked, we sort of, given the hours that we do for plant, we do by 200,000 hours, but it's the same metric in essence. And we've started tracking the severity of the plant incidents that we see, and then the frequency to which we see them, just to get an idea around the trends that are happening in our workspace. And that we might look around environmental conditions as well, location, time of day, all those sort of data points that you can use to understand what's happening within that space. So we typically track that. We report on a monthly basis, and we also do some data analytics and investigative type of understanding processes when we have plant damage. We see around 5 to 6 a month within our fleet. We've got a relatively large fleet of yellow goods equipment that we have around the plant, and then the mechanism for those damages vary significantly around what we're seeing and the reasons why we're seeing those types of incidents occur within the workspace. To provide some context to this data and to what we've experienced in Shore, what we're going to move to now is a video that looks at the enforceable undertaking, looks at the event that we had a couple of years ago around a person and plant interaction, and it sort of at a high level discusses some of the key findings. And we'll unpack those a little bit more. The video goes for about 3 minutes, but it gives a really good understanding as to the event that we had that triggered some of the control measures that we'll talk about in a little bit. So we'll move on to that presentation, and then we'll come back and have a chat afterwards.
And the amputation of his left leg below the knee. The worker and a colleague had excavator leg on the 13th of December 2021 at approximately 5:20 p.m. A worker was struck by a 13-ton excavator while it was reversing, resulting in a severe injury and the amputation of his left leg below the knee. The worker and a colleague had entered the exclusion zone behind the excavator, and the operator was unaware of their presence. At 5:15 p.m, one worker was securing the geofabric above the trench, while the other approached the excavator operator to communicate their position. It was indicated that both workers on the ground would move back up to the geofabric above the trench. However, instead, they ended up within the exclusion zone, standing 3 meters behind the excavator while waiting to cross the road. The 13-ton excavator began moving forward to park up when a worker ahead signaled for it to stop or reverse. The operator had heard on the radio that a 10-yard truck was entering the area to dump gravel. Believing there wasn't enough space, the operator reversed the excavator. While reversing, the excavator operator felt an impact, initially thinking he had hit a traffic cone. He slewed the excavator around, realizing he had struck a worker. Reacting quickly, he moved forward and provided first aid. The injured worker was airlifted to the hospital, where his leg was amputated. The company conducted a review of the incident and identified the need for improved communication and better management of exclusion zones. As a result, they introduced the blind sight system, which detects people and objects around machinery, providing real-time alerts to operators and improving situational awareness to prevent future incidents. This tragic incident underscores the importance of effective communication, situational awareness, and the implementation of additional safety measures on construction sites. Investigation revealed the workers entered the exclusion zone without alerting the operator, who reversed without slewing for better visibility. The pressure to accommodate the incoming truck likely influenced this quick decision-making, proving existing safety controls insufficient. The company responded by implementing the blind sight detection system across their machinery fleet, enhancing pre-start procedures and establishing stricter communication protocols for exclusion zone management. This incident powerfully demonstrated that safety protocols are only effective when consistently applied, and while new technology provides additional protection, it must complement, not replace, fundamental safety practices. It served as a stark reminder that operational pressures should never compromise safety procedures.
So we can, I think, for our organisation, that was very much a wake up call for how we do business, and certainly around the effectiveness or control effectiveness in those high risk working environments. I've only been with the organisation for a short period of time, and when I came into the organisation, it was very clear that the control mechanisms that were in place had been in place for a long period of time, and are generally considered tried and true controls. Certainly within my career, what I've found, we can get into these situations, and the term often used is complacency, but it's more of a normalisation of the control mechanisms that we use and the trust that's developed within those control mechanisms. Quite often we'll focus on the things that go quite poor within the workplace. We're not necessarily focusing on the things that go right. And when we focus on the things that go right, we can quite often pick up hints and tips on how we can improve other control mechanisms within the workplace. Unfortunately, when things are going well, that's not always the case, and we can be sidetracked focusing on other things because we think that this particular work activity or hazard is well controlled and therefore doesn't need our attention. So for us as an organisation, certainly was an opportunity to sit and reflect and make sure that our control effectiveness is appropriate for those types of scenarios. Some key things that, like the video suggested, that came out for us was that reliance on those controls. And what is it that we could apply within the organisation and within our fleet of equipment that could work a lot better for us as an organisation? When I reflect back on my working experience in 2011 to 2013, I'm testing my old memory here. We were doing a lot of work within Melbourne Trains, and what we had established at that time was quite an early phase technology around alerting plant operators that people, trains, equipment may be in the work environment. And if you know the little discs that you get when you go into a restaurant, or you might go into Live Eat, and that's not a sponsor, by the way, but Live Eat, and you order a meal and you get the little black discs and they highlight red and they vibrate. that was some of the early technology that we used within plant and equipment to sort of alert operators that, hey, someone might be in the zone of influence of your machine or within the salute radius of your machine, and that your ground engaging tools go down and you get out and you have a bit of a look. Blindside, as mentioned in the video, goes far beyond that. And I've got some slides further down just around what that looks like. For us as a business, though, key things out of the video: communication or lack of, processes. So standoff zones or safe standing distances didn't work for us in that scenario. Exclusion zones, though in place, administrative to an extent. Yes, they can have engineering elements to them, but again, didn't work for us. Work area design also did not work for us. So setting up the work area appropriately, you'll see in the video, highlighted the exclusion zone. We had the traffic cones. We had a spotter, in essence, or a safety observer up the far end, guiding in the truck, as an example, and giving directions to the excavator operator to go back. That didn't work for us from a control mechanism point of view. So control effectiveness wasn't adequate. Work area hazards, and then some of those additional controls, even in the communication where the workers had stated, "Hey, we're going to stay high up on the batter." Something changed. There was an upset condition to some extent that resulted in the individuals changing their method of work at that particular time, and then following that pathway that they took, which went in behind the excavator. So for us, what are the impacts of upset conditions? So making sure sort of separation and visibility, so separating people from moving plant and maintaining visibility are critical. Enforcing exclusion zone and traffic management plans. Quite often you'll have a TMP, it gets printed up, it goes on a shelf, goes on a notice board, goes into a folder, right? And it's not a lived document, a lived experience. We need to make them that way. So they need to be a consistent element of the safe system of work to make sure that people have that readily available. They can confirm that the TMP is appropriate. They can confirm the exclusion zones are appropriate. And then we've got methods and means to be able to evaluate that effectiveness. It's critically important. That's where we sort of start to talk to lead indicators. Leveraging technology. Now, Blindside is a fantastic technology. It does have its challenges, which we'll sort of talk about a little bit more, but technology should be seen as our friend. But we need to understand how technology integrates into the way of doing work or work is done. That's really important to understand. A risk management framework and risk decision-making. This is really tricky. So we set up a whole range of risk management systems. Now that might be a risk register, it might be a SWIMS for high risk construction work, it could be a JSEA if you're in manufacturing, if you're in healthcare or whatever it might be, but it is a form of risk assessment that we undertake that gets us looking at the hazards and controls and making sure people are accountable for executing and ensuring that they're effective. We have PRA, so personal risk assessments. They're also known as Take 5, SLAMs, Take 2, all those personal risk assessment tools in little flip books. So we have those levels of risk management. What we quite often overlook is the perception of the risk that the cohort of people using them, so either as a group or as individuals using them, how they perceive, feel, and interact with risk. We quite often overlook that when we're looking at the tools. So it's really important, something we need to consider as part of introducing technology and something we've considered as part of Blindside and our overall risk management framework, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And then the real world impact. So looking at those data, so making data-driven decisions based on case study, the literature, the statistics related to injury and illness, but also using anything that we might be getting from our system around weak signals, whether that's through safety observations, field auditing, field inspections, the range of lead indicators that we use to understand if our systems are operating the way they need to operate, and whether the people that need to apply the systems in the workspace can actually apply them. Not so quite often, again, we think about how people, are they compliant or non-compliant? it's quite often to forget that the system needs to be designed to cater for the human being. We're very complex people, so we need to give appropriate time and consideration to system design and implementation, so that when the person or the people workers get to use that system, it works in a manner that we expect it to work, and it actually fits for the human to use. So they're really important ones, often tricky, especially when we look in the framework of the regulatory space, which is quite black and white. We quite often need to work in the grey and the colour with people as our number one asset to make sure that we can get them to do or set them up for success when it comes to completing their work tasks, which is not an easy task all the time. This is a great saying that sort of sits with me quite often. We don't see things as we are, we see them as we are. And that goes to the risk perception and decision-making piece I was talking about before. It's quite often in that scenario that we saw around our enforceable undertaking that you could look at the individuals within that space and say, hey, they should never have been behind the machine in the first place. And yes, we don't want people standing behind the machine, but we need to ask ourselves as professionals and organisations, how is it that people can get to those positions in the first place? And how is it that the risk perception associated with those decisions or that work process ends up with people being in that position? Now, we've got an obligation to make sure that we're supporting our people to build on that risk perception and decision-making capability. And we can do that through utilising technology, but we can do that through the programs that we implement within the workplace as well. So that saying always sticks in my mind when I'm looking at change. So from a change management perspective, but also when we're looking at workers imagined, workers planned, workers done through the life cycle of a work activity or project. Leveraging technology to support existing forms of control. Like the video stated, and rightly so, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. There are some processes that work quite well or quite effective through the hierarchy of control that we can still apply and continue to apply as part of our standard working methodology. They are still having exclusion zones, still having really sound protocols around communication, making sure we have people appropriately trained as safety observers and making sure they understand that role, understanding operators understand their part within those processes. Training is really important for both construction workers and non-construction workers. Overall, training is important, and how we look at training needs to change, especially when we look at younger demographics within the workspace. Their view of the world can be completely different to the people who are designing training programs, for example. So we need to be quite nuanced in how we look at training programs and how we embed training across our organisation for the different cohorts of workers that we have across the board. So it's really important to understand that those baseline controls will continue to work, but can't necessarily be relied upon in their own right. Some of that technology that's coming through, wearable devices, becoming very common. I think most people I know have a smartwatch and they get their messages and they get their emails through their smartwatch. I don't have one. I still like the old analog one, and I like having to go and check my emails and doing those bits and pieces. But they are very common. The Internet of Things. So that's the trackability, that's the connectedness of all things that are happening. So for us in the organisational context, for example, it's how do we connect up, say, blind sight to the other systems that we have operating to make sure that we get the notifications from that system very quickly. They can be analysed and then a decision made on the run, and not having to wait for someone to data mine all that information to make a good decision around, okay, well, what are potential next steps in regards to a particular incident? AI and machine learning. Blindsight's a great one for this, and we'll sort of look at some of those things in a little bit. VR, AR, drones, autonomous systems and robotics. So these things are really starting to come into the form. We've had it a little bit in civil construction. I know other industries, plant manufacturing, all those types of things are certainly using more technology than we are in the civil construction space. But there are things that we're looking at introducing, even if we're, say, looking at projects in remote areas where we're not having to drop people on the ground to do the assessments, if we can use drones and other forms of technology for monitoring, then it adds real value. It makes sure that our people aren't away from base for too long, for one, and that we're not putting them into areas where there's low reception, where there's not a lot of support and help, especially on the West Coast where it's quite rough. And I know there's mining operations down there. They certainly experience more than anyone. Especially in the mining context, there's a lot of automation around systems. So automated equipment, automated plant, automated monitoring, all those types of things. So yes, they absolutely provide benefit, but we just need to be careful that when we're introducing these technologies, they're not presenting things that we might not be aware of or haven't considered. It's the old try to solve a hazard or a risk and introduce a new one, and not adequately address that as part of that rollout strategy. So change management is really important when it comes to leveraging technology. So in the video we mentioned Blindside. I was going to put a link in here, but it's a bit hard to see the video footage. So what Blindside does in essence is what we do. You'll see in this image to the top left-hand side, just under Blindside, you'll see there the black box that's in those windows. That's an indicator device that goes inside the cab of the excavator. So the excavator operator, based on how the exclusion zones are set up, will get an indication onto the display. At the back of the machine here, this is an excavator in case you can't see it quite well. Typically we have 2 sensors on each one of our machines that is fitted with Blindside. These sensors are configured through an online database that myself and a few other administrators have control of within the organisation. And we work with the technology provider to set the zones. And we've set 2 zones in essence. We've set a critical zone, which extends out to, in essence, 3 meters away from the machine, which is our critical zone. And then there's a 4 to 4.5 meter away sort of awareness zone that exists, that also alerts. If anyone steps in this image here on the right-hand side in in-cab alert display, into that red zone, it'll alert like it's demonstrated on the display, and it'll alert in the cab. So there'll be a warning signal within the cab that alerts the operator that there's someone within that critical zone. And it'll also, outside of the machine, alert the person who's on the ground that they are in a critical zone and they need to step away. And it's quite loud, very audible. Like you can distinctively tell when you're reviewing the data and the videos that come through in the system from that alert that an individual has been alerted to the fact they're in the critical zone. Why is it set at 3 meters? That's the recommendation from the manufacturer. And the data tells us that most serious injuries and fatalities occur when someone is standing within 3 meters of that machine. So we've set that zoning up through the sensors to be 3 meters, and then we still have that alert process that happens outside of the 3 meter zone, which is really, really important. Now, we work very closely with the Blindside provider to make sure that the configurability of the machine is appropriate. Now, the sensors can move around the machine, so you can see here at the bottom left-hand image, the position of the sensors. They can be moved around to cater for the arc of the machine. So at the moment, we have 8-ton and 13-ton machines fitted with Blindside as part of our initial rollout post the enforceable undertaking. And we're sort of getting to the end point of that rollout as we speak. But depending on the type of machine, whether it's Komatsu or CAT, how the handrails are positioned, you might need to adjust them slightly. However, they work quite well. And you'll see on the right-hand side the display system status light. So this gives you an indication as to what you would see and what we use to understand whether the system is functioning when the machine goes to be operated. The system itself will only operate when the machine's engaged. So when the hydraulics are engaged, then that's when the system kicks in, and we start to see those data sets get presented through the system. And it will punch out alerts for us. And I'll just move to the next slide on what this looks like from the data position. So we have a login to Blindside, and then continually we get updated on the performance of the machine, the machine, the status of the exclusion zones, and then if we have an event of a particular nature that we need to review. And again, understanding that, say, it's AI generated in essence, but some key things are we have them looking for persons, so we can distinguish between what is a person and what is a car, what is a cone, so that we can train the AI to tell us what we want to look for. And a great point is you can pick up if the person's looking away or looking towards the machine. The machine using AI can tell if the machine and the person is coming together, so the gap is closing or the gap is opening. And we can use those data points to ascertain whether it's a high risk event, a moderate, a safe, or an AI error. And we do get some AI errors where a car might be going past a work site, and it might pick up that the driver's wearing high vis, but they're a member of the public and they're just going through traffic controlled area. So these are the types of things that we can monitor and control. It'll tell us which sensor it's picked up on, what it's classified as, the distance. So is it 1, is it 1.5, is it 3, is it 4.5? The speed to which the machine's operating. So in this case, this machine was stationary and the machine was slewing or was placing the bucket down or had the bucket down when the person walked past. So this blue rectangle indicates where the individual is. In this particular video, the machine was stationary. So it had the ground engaging tools on the ground. It was not slewing. And the individual had spoken to the operator of the machine to say, hey, I'm coming on your own side. I'm going to walk around in an arc and come around behind you. I'll let you know when I'm out of the space. So in the video, the worker moves to the left, past the shadow, and then you can see him hop on the radio, and then you can see the shadow of the machine move after he's received that positive communication and he's outside of that 4.5 metre zone. We, however, still get an alert for now, and then we train the AI to learn what is high risk, moderate, or safe. That's one example. Here's another example. So this is in a roadworks construction area. We've got a truck here parked up within the zone. We've got a travelling lane here. So the space is really, really short. So we've got a travelling lane where you can see the black car, which is a member of public. And we've got a truck that's moved up alongside an excavator. So in this scenario, for example, the AI suggested that it was moderate, but it's been reviewed as safe, understanding the communication, the lack of space within that work environment and the work activity that was being done. And then we have a third example where we have a worker doing trench work. And you can see here the AI suggested that it was high. We reviewed it as moderate. Now, the reason why the AI picked it up as high is because we're training the AI to detect for us the worker's head is positioned low, so they're not looking at the machine. The machine is moving, and the worker, I know it's a little bit hard with the shading, but the image doesn't give a true indication of the sensory work. The worker's outside of the 3 metre zone, but inside, say, the 4.5 metre zone, the orange zone. So that still picked it up and said, hey, he's very close to the 3 metre zone. His head's down. He's not looking at the machine. The AI didn't pick up that he was on a radio. Therefore, it's classified it as high. We go back to the analysis, and then we reclassify it if we feel we need to such a point that the AI will start generating them, and then we become a validation of those data sets and data points. What we've found is that when we have these videos occur, or when we have these events occur, our people are absolutely moving out of the space. So when you see the live video, you can tell when the alarm goes off on the external component of the machine and tells the worker they're in that zone. And then the worker steps out. And we can also see that the machine operation ceases in a lot of cases as well. So the excavator stops moving and they're off the control straight away. Now, if we look back at the enforceable undertaking video and review how that incident occurred, then we would have potentially mitigated that event from happening, because there would have been an audible alarm that occurred that would have alerted the people on the ground within the 4.5 metre zone and certainly within the 3 metre critical zone, that there was an excavator within that area, which would have given them the opportunity to move straight away. And it would have alerted in the cabin, and the operator would have stopped the machine and dropped the ground engaging tools and not operated that machine until those alarms were validated and the area was checked. When we look at mobile plant, this is the kind of summary we get from the system, which allows us to then go and analyse that data. Again, we're still in the process of validating the data, but the data we're getting through is really, really good. So it's allowing us to improve how we work, and it's certainly leading to better outcomes in the workspace. We've still got some way to go. Some challenges we're seeing as part of that implementation process. Look, data mining is pretty difficult. And it takes a fair bit of time to process that data in the first stages. However, it's well worth it. We don't want those kind of incidents occurring. And sorry, I've got a spelling mistake there. It's supposed to be AI. So we don't want these incidents to occur. So we need to persist. So when we're implementing system change, we need to be cognizant of the time that it takes to implement the change and implement it effectively. What you don't want to have is a scenario where it becomes a bit too hard and you rush through the implementation phase, and we're not training the AI the way it needs to be trained, and we're not giving it the time and validation that it requires in order to make sure the system works. We don't want a system that works partially. So we need to give it the time to effectively roll it out. Sensor configuration, setting exclusion zones, alert criteria can be challenging sometimes, especially when you've got really close working proximities. It can be a real challenge. Sensor discrepancies. So there is the potential for moisture ingress. The sun might be pointing on a lens at a particular angle, and that might set the alarm off, and we might get nuisance alarms. That's a critical thing. Nuisance alarming can be really challenging. So it's understanding that differentiation between what is a nuance alarm at the start versus a operational alarm once the system is go live. Acting swiftly on validating risk conditions is also critically important. So we have a couple of people dedicated to looking at this data all the time. Well, I say all the time. We're always in the system having a look and responding, but it's just something to be considerate of in regards to that space. I've mentioned it before, change management is critically important. So we ran through consultation process, design workshops, business management system change, risk assessments, really clear consultation processes. And then we ran through a sort of like a scrutineering committee to make sure that the changes were effective and were going to be able to be implemented long term. So that's checking the effectiveness of the controls, both pre and post implementation. Continued improvement. Look, zero harm and harm minimisation is more than sort of that philosophical utopian endpoint that we feel we all want to get to. I think there's probably a few engineers and health workers and things like that on the call as well. What we're really trying to do is control the rate of failure, right? Failure is a part of human learning, and failure can be a good thing. What we want to do is grapple with the control of those rates of failure and make sure that we can demonstrate we've done what's reasonable to ensure that we're minimising those failure rates as far as reasonably practicable. So that's always a tough balance. We don't want to hurt anyone within our workspace. We don't want to hurt members of the community, and we certainly don't want to do things that are going to impact the community when our primary function at Shaw Contractor is to build infrastructure for the community. So we want to do that safely and make sure that workers get home to their people. Looking at weak signals, look, Shell, mobile, oil and gas, they do this really well. Looking for weak signals, so those little things that don't seem quite right, looking in the grey for those signals to go, hey, this thing doesn't seem quite right to me today. Whether it's a worker, whether it's a manager, whether it's a group of people working in a shift team, it's looking for those weak signals around, okay, where do I think this is not working? Focusing on system improvements to drive improved outcomes. Again, we mentioned it before, workers planned, or workers imagined, workers planned, workers done, always changes. So we may set out to do something at the start, but I can near guarantee you when we're out in the shop floor and people are doing the work activity, it's not getting done the way we imagined it getting done. So it's having those checkpoints, those important lead indicators that aren't there just for a metric, but are there to look for the weak signals, to get conformity around how the system's being applied, or is there a requirement to change the system to better meet the needs of the people doing the work? I sort of mentioned metrics before. They do matter, but we need to apply a lot of critical thought into the design of those lead metrics. We shouldn't be doing it just to go, hey, Joe Bloggs, Mark Harris went and did 3 lead indicators this week. Fantastic. No, it is, what are we looking at? Is it important? Does it drive safety? Does it drive improvement? And can I use that as a means to improve how we do work more broadly within the organisation? That's the key. Removing safety clutter. So I'm not sure how many safety professionals we've got on the call, but safety professionals have traditionally been pretty good at creating a whole bunch of stuff, as well as other people, not just safety professionals. It's really important to make sure that the things we do add value to how we do it. So putting in forms, putting in process for the sake of process is not a good way to go about it. So we need to be critical in our thinking around designing safe systems of work, systems of operations for the people that are using them. And then making automated systems team players, right? Yes, they might be AI, it might be technology, but we've got custodianship of it. We can fit it into our team. So it doesn't need to be in replacement of, it doesn't mean to sort of go above and beyond what we might need. It needs to be seen as a team player and integrate into that team dynamic as an organisation. And from that, we can improve how we do business. And that's really what's been the driver for us as an organisation when we look at the event that we had and the things that we could do to improve how we do work. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was really valuable and insightful. I think we are open to questions at this point, so feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. We do have a few. I might just grab the first one over here, which says, what has the worker response been to the using of AI and additional alarms?
Yeah, generally pretty good. I think always it's about how we deliver the message and the why. So if we clearly articulate the why and the importance of what it is that we're doing and how that, it almost goes to automated systems of team players. So if we see them as a part of the team and not replacement of, we tend to get a far more, a greater appreciation of the value that AI can have. I know there's some fears around sort of AI replacing roles and those types of things. I can see why that's a talking point, but for us as an organisation, if we explain the why well enough, they generally take it on pretty well. It's generally a failure in us as an organisation to communicate effectively with our workforce that we tend to have that rub, and you'll always get the bell curve, right, where you've got one on the far right, one on the far left, but generally it's a pretty balanced process. But if we need to, we can spend additional time with people, but it's really in the why. I hope that answered your question. Worker responses.
We have another.
So is blindside?
We have another question about blindside.
Yeah, go.
There's a bit of an overlap happening here, but that's okay. The question was about the blindside being commercially available.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. So blindside is commercially available. It is Apto Technologies is the name of the organisation that utilises or facilitates blindside. Look, it's pretty cost effective, to be fair. For the value it adds to the organisation, it absolutely is really good. So again, I'm sure you can reach out to me, Mark Harris, Shore Contracting. You'll find me if you want any questions or you want any assistance, by all means. But Aptella Technologies will be able to help you out.
Thank you, Mark. I think the next question is in relation to your slide about leveraging technology. It says, in relation to smartwatches, would these not become another risk issue as a distraction to workers on the ground? So they miss things like moving plant, etc.
Yes, they can. So it's a little bit like the sort of the new mobile phones coming in over the last sort of 10, 15 years would have really become a smart device. Yes, they can present a risk. I think it's for us as professionals, as an organisation, to really run through that risk management process and understand the sort of impact that can likely have within the work context that's being applied. So in the healthcare setting, for example, it might add value. Civil construction, typically not. Wearables aren't. Or if you look at a smartwatch, right, it's not really adding a lot of value, and we want people to be concentrating on the work tasks that they're doing. But it really needs to be a risk-based approach, specific to the organisation that you're working within.
Thank you, Mark. The next question says, did the review of the crush injury include not removing the pressure until the ambulance arrived?
Yeah, it certainly did. So it covered off a range of response processes that we needed to improve on as part of the incident. And I think more broadly, I think when we sort of sit, it's almost like complacency, right? Where you go, it won't sort of happen here, therefore we've got a baseline response plan. I'm used to working in very high risk industries, so for me it's quite attuned to, hey, there's not a lot of response coverage. We need to be able to stabilise in situ, and therefore we need a range of action. So yes, it did, and then it led on to a range of other improvements for our organisation as well. I think it's really important that emergency response planning is, yes, managing the overarching scenario, but rightly, as the person points out, how do you actually respond in those cases to make sure that the injured worker is stabilised appropriately and we don't exacerbate the injury by doing something incorrect? And that's always the hard balance. It's like some people do first aid training but then don't feel comfortable applying first aid because of the risk that it presents to them through their own perception. So it's always a tough balance, but yes.
Thanks, Mark. Just while we talk about training, there was a question about, are there basic training courses available for non-construction industry workers operating on a live construction site? I'm thinking of a training in basics of movement around construction sites.
Probably there are, and you can do a bit of searching, but I think the most common that is undertaken is the construction induction card. Now it's called different colours, so excuse my ignorance. I think my white or blue card. It's the construction induction card that a lot of people are required to complete. So it gives you a basic understanding of construction sites and the risks and hazards associated. It is a good little course, mind you. I haven't done mine for some time, but when I'm looking at the training content, it's a pretty good starting point. There are some other courses through the Australian Quality Framework that you can leverage that do allow for you to increase your knowledge through those training courses.
Thank you, Mark. And there has been another question about how much the cost is associated with blindside.
Oh, that's a cracking question. For devices themselves, look, they're not. So I think it's, I'll give a ballpark figure here, okay? So don't hang your business case on my comment. It is, I think it's between $15,000 and $20,000 per machine, and that includes the online technology where we're analysing all the data, includes all the support. So, example, we're having a couple of challenges just around moisture ingress with changing in humidity. So Aptella are onto it. We raise the challenge. They're off and running. They come back with solutions straight away. So yes, fixed cost, but then when you get the support mechanisms that come with it, mind you, it does depend on your organisation, does depend where you position, does depend on the type of machines that you've got. Like I said, we're looking at 8 and 13-tonne machines at the moment. So that could change if we say start to progress to our 20-tonne machines, but it's a ballpark figure to get you started.
Thank you, Mark. I think these might be our last couple. The next one is more of a comment which says, system testing has to be more than just testing, that it does what you expect. You have to test how a user can break the system.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. We talk about it a lot, right? So when we're doing end user testing on new systems, whether that's machine operated or management system operated, we always make sure we've got a really good delivery plan to rightly so, to pick out, hey, is it as per designed? But we tell our people, go and try and break the machine, try and break it, do it, throw everything you can at it, and see if the system's going to obviously in control testing environments. I'll put a caveat, but we should always test to make sure that the change that we're making is going to work as we had planned it to work. And the best way to do that is work through that work as imagined, work as planned, work as done process, and then you'll get a really good indication as to how that system's working. Absolutely, don't just assume it's going to work for you. You really need to give it a good crack. And see if it's going to deliver on the expectation that you'd set yourselves as an organisation or a group of people.
Thank you for that. I think the last question is just about the animated video being available publicly. We just wanted to remind that this particular session is recorded and will be available on YouTube, so that will contain the video as well. Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Mark, in terms of the video being available?
No, that should be perfectly fine. It's no drama. I think you can get through. Again, you can contact me personally. I think, I'm not sure if my contact information's up at all, but again, it's markharris@shorecontracting.com if you want to send me an email, or mark.harris@shorecontracting.com if you want to send me an email, or hit me up on LinkedIn and we can have a conversation. That's no drama. It should be fine. It's not a problem at all. I know we've gone a little bit over time, but it's just a couple of questions I wouldn't mind just answering for a few people. So in relation to the last question of non-construction, which the use of working in plant SWIMS works well with their sign-off? Absolutely. I think any time with a SWIMS, make sure you're being specific. So make sure you're being specific to the hazard you're trying to control, or the risk, whichever interchangeable term you're using, and then the control. So be very specific with the control that you're putting in place and who's accountable for the implementation of that control. It's really important. Quite a lot, we get a lot of generic responses in SWIMS. Get specific. Put what's meaningful. Put what's going to get done, not what you think is going to get done. And if you think it needs to be done, validate that it's a useful control. And then there was another one just around trucks entering site. Yeah, we try and ensure that everyone has construction worker cards. That might not always be the case. So we have a very robust contractor management system and process where we validate risk management skills, whether they've got systems in place and processes. We do validation checks, screening, a whole range of induction type elements. And then if we need to, we'll verify competency in field if it's required for a truck driver in that occasion. But delivery drivers are treated slightly different.
Thank you, Mark. And I think Tracy from my team has also put in your email address in the chat. So feel free to get in touch with Mark should you have any questions. I think this brings us to the end. Thank you, everyone. Just wanted to quickly remind you that this event is run as part of the WorkSafe Tasmania month. So please head to worksafe.tas.gov.au/month to find out what other webinars and in-person sessions we have for the whole of the month. There will also be a survey link towards the end of the session. We would love to hear your feedback. And thank you so much again, Mark. I think we've had some great takeaways to take back to our work and just make work sites safer, worker safety, keeping that as a top priority. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off?
No, just keep. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming, right? Just keep chipping away. Every positive thing makes a difference. Just keep working away at it. We'll all get there in the end.
That's great advice. Thank you again. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. Have a great rest of the day and stay safe.
See you later.